Let me tell you what I'm doing today. So I've got 10 minutes to talk to you about accelerating the transition. I'm going to explain to you why WWF is here and involved in this debate, because that may not be immediately apparent, and then what a faster transition to sustainable transport looks like. And I believe we're going to take questions in a panel debate afterwards. Yeah, cool. Okay, so first slide. So why does WWF care about cars? That one went a bit too fast. Animals don't drive cars. Why are we here? Why do we care? I still get this quite a lot when I'm at events. You know, what are you guys doing here? And actually, the logic, the rationale is quite simple, and we've heard much of it from Jonathan already. The statistic from a recent report of ours called Wildlife in a Warming World, that roughly half of the biodiversity in the world's most important natural environments is at risk of extinction under climate change, under business as usual. So I think that shows you pretty starkly why we care very deeply about climate change. And if we're able to meet our Paris Agreement commitments that Jonathan was talking about, we can cut that from a half to about a quarter. Ultimately, we need to be moving towards restoring nature, not just halting the decline, but certainly meeting our Paris targets is a good step forward. So that's the first part of the logic as to why I'm here. The second part is something that Jonathan said earlier as well. Transport is now the largest share of carbon emissions in the UK. Here it says 26%. The provisional 2017 figures came out at 9:30 this morning, and I thought, I wonder if it's gone up a bit. It's now 34%, and I thought that's a hell of a jump, but feels very timely for the discussion that we're having today. Also, it ain't falling. That's the big problem. It's not going down. I'm not sure what the latest stats have said about that, whether it's falling or not, but if it's gone up to 34%, I can't see how it can have fallen. So, transport is a big deal for climate change. All this other stuff is a big deal too, but we've actually done some really good work on our energy supply, down by almost 60% since 1990, the emissions from energy. So really good work. That must continue, but we also need to start tackling these other sectors too that haven't done enough to reduce emissions yet. So where are we now? We've seen where the stats are. What has the government committed to doing about this? It's committed to ending the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles by 2040. So it's in line with France, which has committed to the exact same thing. But it's behind quite a few other countries, including part of this country. And actually, since I first put this slide together for an earlier presentation, quite a lot is changing. This is a very, very fast-moving environment. So unfortunately, Austria and India, there's a bit less clarity about what they're doing now and a bit of policy U-turning going on. But we can also add Taiwan and Sri Lanka into this column, and we can also add Israel into this column. So no doubt that there's a lot going on. Also not shown here, we have electric vehicle mandates, so production or sales mandates, in California, in Quebec, and in China. So those are regions that are really taking this seriously and really saying, right, let's get building clean vehicles. So we think that given that this is where most countries are congregating, and given that actually, in order to just meet our existing carbon targets, pre-Paris carbon targets, the Committee on Climate Change has said 2040 might be a little too late, and 2035 might be more appropriate. In order to be Paris compliant, we think that we probably want to be around about this sort of space. So we have asked the question of a research agency called Vivid Economics. If we end conventional petrol and diesel car and van sales in 2030 rather than 2040, what would the effect be on the UK auto industry, on the environment, and on our energy system? And we have just published part one of this research, looking at the auto industry and the environment. Part two will be out in a month or two. And I'm going to run through some of the results from this. The first thing is that we would be far and away the dominant EV market in the European Union. accounting for almost half of demand for EVs, unless other countries decide to also up their ambition. And this is quite important. I'm going to spend a minute on something that's a bit technical, but it's worth getting into. The UK is pretty well positioned, relatively speaking, for the transition to electric vehicles. Number one, if we have this higher demand for vehicles, that proximity to demand is something that might make an investor sit up and think, we've got a good market to sell into, this might be a good place to set up shop. But also, our auto industry is particularly good at assembling vehicles. We're also good at producing parts for vehicles, but we're really good at assembling them, and that's what we spend a lot of our time, money, and manpower on. And electric vehicles need assembling. They have far fewer parts, far fewer parts, so there isn't much of a future in parts production, particularly for the internal combustion engine, but in vehicle assembly there is. So we're actually quite well positioned for this transition, and recognizing that, we could have 100,000 jobs in EV manufacturing in the UK by 2030 under this scenario that actually brings additional production to the UK, boosting overall jobs in the auto industry by 14,000. Those 100,000 people could be making up to around about 1 million electric vehicles per year in 2030 and adding about £3 billion to the economy. So it's a pretty good story. We know where we want to get to. There is definitely a compelling prize here for politicians and for the economy. Obviously, what I'm really interested in is the environment side of things. So if we switch to that for a sec, 62 million tonnes is a difficult number to hold in your head, but that's roughly equivalent to the carbon emissions from 6 million homes. And that's the amount that would be saved over the period of the fifth carbon budget by this decision. That's over the period 2028 to 2032. That's over half of the current gap that the government doesn't have any plans for how to meet in its fifth carbon budget. So a pretty significant contribution. It could also reduce exhaust emissions, exhaust pollution, by almost a third in 2030, and that in turn would help drive compliance with legal air quality limits. For example, the Southwest would be driven into compliance in 2021 by this faster transition. And on the climate side of things, the UK would also be the first country to signal its intention to increase its ambition on decarbonising transport. We've had lots of targets set. Nobody's actually raised their targets yet. So this year, increasing ambition is a very important theme in the international process. By 2020, countries are expected to come back into the UN and say, right, this is what we committed in 2015 in Paris. We know it's not enough. This is what we're adding on top. So this is definitely something that fits that bill pretty well. And it's not just us talking about this. There's quite a few people talking about it, including in the past couple of weeks and couple of days even. We've had the air quality super inquiry comprising 4 select committees has said that we need to be going for a faster phase out. We should be going as fast as countries who are targeting 2030. Sadiq Khan, in his Transport Strategy for London, said that the UK as a whole needs to be moving by 2030. In the BEIS Select Committee, over the past few days and months, we've seen energy companies, National Grid and E.ON, signalling their support for this. And politically, we've seen the Green Party take this on as policy. The SNP, obviously the governing party in Scotland, want the government to move faster to help them achieve their ambition. And the Lib Dems in their last manifesto said that they wanted to end diesel vehicle sales by 2025. So the movement is growing, and I believe at some point you're going to be asked if you agree with this as well. I think I'm pretty much out of time, so loads more going on this year that I don't have time to delve into here. That's part 2 of our report. Just final word is on the Zero Emission Vehicle Summit, and I wanted to quote Theresa May, who said, "Next autumn, the UK will demonstrate our global leadership in clean transportation when we host a groundbreaking Zero Emission Vehicle Summit." What better way to demonstrate global leadership than by accelerating this transition? Thank you very much.